What do you think are the biggest economic trends we're likely to see affect the capital this year?
Well, it's overwhelmingly what's happening to the general economy. Obviously, what happens to the UK economy happens to London. And what is happening in the general economy is that it's picking up very nicely and much better than people expected 12 months ago. I mean, when you think about it, 12 months ago we were talking about the triple dip. But we didn't have a triple dip. In fact, we actually ended up not having a double dip. But the economy is growing well. The services economy are growing particularly well, of course, which suits London because it's a very heavily service-based economy. Employment is picking up very nicely. And of course, the other thing is the housing market is picking up throughout the country. But in London, of course, it's absolutely red hot. I think the last set of figures I saw, which were the ONS figures for January, suggested that London prices are up 13% on a year earlier, which is absolutely extraordinary. But to cut a long story short, what's happening in the UK economy is good, and what's happening in the London economy is actually better.
You mentioned the housing market there growing at a substantial rate. London's house prices are 20% above their pre-recession rate. Is that a sustainable thing to be happening? Or is that a danger that there's going to be another housing bubble?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt about it that within London the housing market is absolutely exceptional and very, very different from the rest of the country. And you could almost say now there's a housing bubble within London, although there isn't a housing bubble outside London. Whether that's sustainable or not, of course, it depends where the money keeps coming in. Such a lot of the London housing market is exceptional because of all the foreign money that's coming in. London tends to be a sort of a haven, a safe haven for overseas investors. So I think in that sense, provided the money keeps coming in, it probably is sustainable. Of course, the real problem is for a lot of people, especially first-time buyers in London, especially perhaps people in their 20s, they find it exceptionally difficult to get onto the housing ladder. And this is, I think, the biggest problem of London property.
Do you think that the government's Help to Buy scheme is doing something to help that?
I don't think there's any doubt about it. I mean, there are two aspects to the Help to Buy scheme, and it's actually the equity one that is actually probably doing the most good in the sense that it's actually helping people to buy houses, especially first-time buyers. But it's interesting, if you look at the statistics, and I don't know every single statistic, so I use this as a generality, again, it seems to be helping more people outside the capital than inside the capital. I think the real problem is, what do we do about London property? There's obviously huge pressure on it. Population's growing quite quickly, and obviously the property, the actual stock of property, is not growing like anything like that. I think one of the biggest challenges actually for London is to get going, build some more affordable property so that actually first-time buyers are more able to get on the ladder.
Of course, Boris Johnson has just announced 42,000 new houses this year, I think something like that.
Well, if Boris Johnson has announced 42,000, that's obviously a step in the right direction. But something really does have to be done about this. This is London's biggest problem.
Do you feel there is a London-centric economy at the moment, or particularly a London-centric recovery from the recession, and is that a good thing or a bad thing for the country's economy as a whole?
I think it's true that the economy throughout the United Kingdom is improving now. Most of the statistics show that, not least of all the labour market. And the labour market's been an exceptionally bright spot. Even during the Great Recession, the labour market performed better than most people expected. But I think it's true to say that obviously a lot of the growth is in services. And London is a particularly service-based economy. But actually throughout the United Kingdom, services comprise well over 75% of GDP. But also within London, you have a lot of, obviously, the financial services, which are recovering now. The city's recovering quite well. But a lot of the creative industries tend to be focused in London. And this is obviously where London does score over the rest of the United Kingdom. And it's interesting, if you look at a longer term period and compare now with, say, 10 or 15 years ago, there is no doubt about it that London and the southeast of England together, because the southeast is almost part of the London economy, they are actually tending to grow quicker than the rest of the United Kingdom. And so obviously their share of GDP has been increasing as well.
Do you think that this should be, there is a way that this should be spread across the rest of the country? I mean, for example, a lot of people have been saying that HS2 might be a possible way of spreading that business outside the capital.
I think for a start, London is a very successful international city, so you don't want to do anything that damages London. And so if there's help for the regions, that's fine, provided it doesn't detract from London's success. And don't forget, probably London, because it's such a generator of tax revenue and income tax revenue, does help to support the rest of the United Kingdom economy. There's no doubt about that. We need London to thrive, for the country to thrive. Whether HS2 will do anything to help the regions, I personally have my very, very big doubts. I think it's true to say that in France, where they've had the TGV system for a very long time, what tends to happen actually is that it helps Paris rather than it helps the other cities around France. Of course, France is a much bigger country than the United Kingdom. And what may happen is that you might think, oh, right, we will build HS2 up to Leeds or Manchester to help Manchester or Leeds, but actually it may help London more than it would help Manchester and Leeds. And in any case, whatever else we think about HS2, is that it's a hugely expensive 50 billion quid's worth plus of white elephant. I mean, I just think the technology is moving ahead so fast that this idea that you have people travelling around the country to do business, it's already a business model that's really, I think, past its sell-by date. And by 2030, 2040, it's even going to be more past its sell-by date. You can do more with that 50 billion than build a white elephant, in my view.
You talked there about not wanting to damage London's success. Do you think that cities such as London should be granted more autonomy from the rest of the country in terms of their economic power? For example, one of the other things I was looking at for this was the London minimum wage being a plausible thing because London operates in such a different way. Should London government be granted some more autonomy, do you think?
I'm sure Boris Johnson would like to see more powers being ceded to him as London Mayor of City Hall. But I feel generally that it would depend then hugely on what sort of mayor you've got. I don't know, we don't have much of a tradition in this country of having really independent cities, perhaps as they do on the continent, particularly in France. And so I personally wouldn't go down that route. You might even find that you end up with a London mayor that does more harm than good. I just think it's better to keep national policies, and London will actually thrive because it is internationally competitive. I mean, the key thing about any successful part of any economy is whether it's actually keeping up with its international peers. Whether more autonomy for London would necessarily help that, I very much doubt. When it comes to minimum wage, well, the national minimum wage is always a ridiculous idea, because what may look low in London, of course, it could look high in the northeast of England, where you have a very different set of economic circumstances. But insofar as you have a minimum wage, I think, even having said that about national minimum wage, I prefer that than to have all sorts of regional minimum wages, which would be very, very hard, I think, to implement.
And finally, what's been in the news quite recently is Boris Johnson has re-pledged to make Silicon Roundabout in the Old Street area a place for startup technology businesses and to find the next Mark Zuckerberg for this country, which hasn't happened since David Cameron first tried to start the whole thing up 3 years ago. Do you think government policy should be there to help businesses start up in the capital, in that area or any other area? And if so, what should that be?
I mean, I'm a great believer in just basically getting the conditions for business right, whether it's in Old Street or whether it's in Manchester. I come from near Manchester, so obviously I'm going to stick up for Manchester, aren't I? Why not a Silicon roundabout in Manchester? I mean, why not? You get the business conditions right. You try and keep business rates relatively low. You try and keep the labour market on costs like national insurance contributions relatively low. You try and keep the corporation tax relatively low, which actually this government is generally doing. You try and minimise a lot of the more, should we say, draconian regulations, and then you basically just let business get on with it. And so I'm not one for sort of tinkering and fiddling with the economy. I think that's a great mistake. This is why I'm against enterprise zones and all these things. You shouldn't need to be making these enterprise zones. You want to make the country an enterprise country. And indeed, when I was in the Institute of Directors, I spent all my life just saying you just want to get the general business conditions going, and then people will flourish and they'll make their own businesses. It's true. And I'm optimistic about this country because I think the government on the whole has tried, although the regulations are still absolutely horrendous. It has tried to help business. And I think we are basically still entrepreneurial country. So don't fiddle. Let's get the basic conditions right, and then let business get on with it.
What do you think is the greatest danger to the London economy in the coming year?
I think in the coming year, and I'm going to make a very political point here, there is a general election next year. I don't know who's going to win the election. I suspect, the Labour Party is still ahead in the polls, so we'll wait and see what happens there. But if it were a government that came in with a lot of anti-business, draconian taxes, draconian regulations, that would be the worst thing for London, and it would be the worst thing for the United Kingdom. But whether that happens or not, these are political issues, they're not economic issues.
Ruth Lea, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.